surrogacy violates the dignity of women and children by turning reproduction and our reproductive capacities into a commercial transaction, into something that can be bought and sold.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. Did you know that I actually sing that every single time? Yeah, it's literally me. That is not a pre-recorded intro. You want to hear it again? Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. See, I do it every single time, the exact same, so that when you hear my lovely voice, you know you're in the right place. Speaking of the right place, there are so many spaces on the internet that can feel overwhelming and daunting and just so confusing. And I wanted to give you a place that you can land that is not only evidence-based, but it's completely safe. Safe for you to ask your questions, safe for you to bring up taboo or uncomfortable conversations, safe for you to explore alternative options, safe for you to do the digging and the science and the research to actually get your hands on data-driven support so that you can have an informed and confident pregnancy and birth experience. And that place is the Birth Lounge app. It's downloaded straight to your phone for iPhone and Android. So go to your respective app store and search the Birth Lounge app. And inside there, you're going to find a couple of different components. Number one, probably my favorite, and something I have used every single week in pregnancy, is our fetal development week by week update. And this literally tells you what fetal growth and development your baby is doing in that week of pregnancy. You ain't gonna catch me comparing your baby to the size of a little acorn squash because, well, for me, that's ridiculous. Your baby's never the size of an acorn squash. However, something that might be fun for you to know is, hey, the synapses in your baby's brain are working this week. Hey, your baby can actually swallow this week. Hey, your baby's vascular system, their cardio system, all of it is working this week. Now, of course, those things happen at different points in gestation, but I think it's really fun to know exactly what you are experiencing. What are you growing that week? Are you working on legs and arms, or are you working on eyelashes and toenails? How about noses and ears? Oh my goodness. I really geek out on that type of stuff, and I assume because you're here, you do as well. Head to your app store, download the Birth Lounge app, and begin to check in with what's actually happening with your baby. And before I let you go, I wanted to tell you about one other thing, and that is the pregnancy and postpartum evidence-based articles. It is going to be all of the science and the research and the data that you need to not only ask your provider the questions that matter, that are going to get you evidence-based, individualized care in your pregnancy and birth. And don't worry, I literally have them written out for you. It's not like you have to scan a long article and then come up with questions on your own. No, I literally lay out the question, I lay out the answer, I lay out the data, and then I lay out the questions that you should be asking your provider. And then in postpartum, same exact thing, except obviously about postpartum topics. So what are your boobs doing? How do we need to be feeding your baby? What about newborn sleep? Is this normal with the umbilical cord healing? What about circumcision? It's all included in the Birth Lounge app. So again, head to your app store, whether your iPhone or Android, type in the Birth Lounge app and hit that download button today so that you can start to have an informed and confident birth. I'll see you there. And yes, I genuinely hang out inside of the app so that you and I can chat and you can have your best birth possible. Bye. Well, does it ever get old for you to hang out with me and have me ask the hard and uncomfortable questions? Well, hopefully you answered no, because today's conversation is just that. It's a little taboo. And to be completely honest, when it was first suggested to me to have this topic on the show, my initial instinct was, I don't know if I want to go there. But then I decided, well, that's exactly kind of why I need to go there. I wanted to lean into the discomfort. I wanted to lean into the things that I didn't know. I wanted to lean into those perspectives that I had never considered or been exposed to before. And I figured I would take you along on the ride with me. Today, I am joined by Kallie Fell, who is passionate about women's health and has a master's of science degree in animal sciences, with an emphasis on reproductive physiology and molecular biology. She has worked at the Department of OBGYN at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and continued her education in nursing and has been a perinatal nurse for nearly a decade. She is currently employed by the Center of Bioethics and Cultural Network, the CBC, as the executive director. Now, the CBC is an educational nonprofit addressing bioethical issues that most profoundly affect our humanity, especially issues that arise in the lives of the most vulnerable among us. They work hard to educate and inform members of the general public, thought leaders, lawmakers, and others on ethical issues that may come up in healthcare, biomedical research, and biotechnological advances. In today's episode, Kallie and I are going to talk about the ethical side of surrogacy. We're going to talk about the core ethical concerns around the surrogacy process, how financial compensation impacts this, whether or not having contractual obligations lead to fragmented motherhood, and probably the top thing that you guys talk to me so much about, which is the separation of mother and child. Kallie is going to share her stance on regulation and abolition of surrogacy in the U.S. and exactly what she would like to see done legislatively to protect mothers and children. She's also going to share red flags, conflicts of interest, and how commercial surrogacy impacts the surrogate, the intended parents, and most importantly, the child. If you're watching on YouTube, you are going to see my face drop multiple times in this episode as I begin to realize new perspectives that I have never considered before, like how consent and autonomy play in this, health risk that I'd never thought of when it comes to surrogacy, and how the end of life needs to be part of this conversation. Something else I've never considered before. I even share how I once thought I would be a surrogate, but being pregnant with my own baby has certainly changed my outlook on that, totally aside from the ethical aspects discussed in today's episode. This is a conversation that definitely pushed me to the edge of my comfort zone. Not because I'm uncomfortable talking about this conversation, but because it is things I have never considered before. And as someone who has a lot of children in my life that were created by egg donors, sperm donors, and surrogates, I really felt conflicted in how to navigate this conversation. You know me, I'm all about autonomy. I want you to be able to make the decision for your family that feels best to you. And that's without any judgment for me. I would never judge you for a decision that you made for your own life. However, hearing some of these arguments certainly gave me things to ponder for my own self. So I'm excited to share this conversation. You guys asked for it, and I hope I delivered. Without further ado, Kallie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here and to be discussing such an important topic with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an important topic. And we were chatting briefly before we got started recording. And, I shared with you that when I first came across your Instagram and the message that you guys were sharing, I had never been introduced to that perspective before. I had always just viewed surrogacy as this very altruistic, very selfless thing. And not to say that that's not part of it. It totally is. I think surrogates get into surrogacy because they do care about the people that they are serving. But the points that you make on your Instagram, it made me take a step back and say, wow, that is so interesting. I should lean into why is this making me uncomfortable? How have I been in women's health for 10 years? I've never considered these points. And, how much of this is real for surrogates and for families. And so I'm honestly, it's an honor to have you here. And I'd like to start off with, obviously in true HeHe fashion, a really hard hitting question. And that is, do you feel that surrogacy is inherently exploitative of surrogates?
Well, that is not a hard question to answer.
Okay.
The short answer is absolutely.
Hmm.
And I think just to hit home to what you just said, this is a hard conversation to have because this directly affects people who so desperately want to have family, right? I want to have children, which is a good thing. It is a good desire. And so I am just really grateful. I am being asked more and more to come on podcasts to talk about this because it was in the last decade or two a profoundly bioethical issue, and it still is. We still see the cases of celebrities using surrogate mothers, of parents now, and it's becoming more commonplace to hear these things, and it's an important conversation to have. And so I'm so grateful for this. And before I start answering questions, I always like to just add that infertility is an incredibly heavy and hard, burdensome cross to bear. And so when I answer these questions, I feel very passionately about the views that I have and that we have at the Center for Bioethics and Culture, but we don't come at this at a place that we are blind to the pain and suffering of infertility. And if that's you, that I hope that you have the support and the networks. But yes, we have to talk about the ethical issues here at play. And it is the practice of surrogacy is deeply regressive. Many developed countries have prohibited commercial surrogacy on human rights and women's health grounds. And in fact, as we're recording, just in July of this year, the United Nations did a special report on violence against women and girls. And they found through their comprehensive report that surrogacy is not empowerment, it's exploitation. And this report's going to be presented to the UN, I believe, in October of this year. But this is an industry that is globally going to reach projected over $100 billion in the next decade. And this industry operates off of the backs of women, and it commodifies women, and it quite frankly commodifies children as well. And so we can get into all of those details, but it's a very easy question to answer. I do, at my core, this is an exploitive industry, and the fertility industry has made gobs of money through this technology, through this advancement.
Okay, so for people who are unfamiliar with bioethics, let's start there. When you say the word
Okay.
bioethics, what are we talking about? The ethics of biology?
The ethics of life, right? And so
Okay.
I love this question because the Center for Bioethics and Culture, we are an educational nonprofit that seeks to educate folks in the space of bioethics. And, I'll be traveling for work or for an interview, and I love sitting down and eating a meal at a bar because then you get to engage with people around you, if I'm by myself. And so many times I've had people be like, "Oh, bioethics, that's above my head," or "I don't know what that is," or "Well, how does that affect me?" It affects you all of the time. The decisions we make, whether or not we're going to and I don't want to get into this here, not my case, but vaccinate, whether or not you have end of life care or not, whether your parents have that, how you're going to start and build your family. All of these things are bioethics, right? Anything, we talk or we see a lot now about this artificial womb, that's bioethics. I mean, so it can be as broad or as, you know, it can be a very broad topic, but it's things that we deal with every day. And it's my mission, I guess, if you will, to see a younger generation and older generation too, but to see a world where we can talk about these issues, these big, seems really heavy issues, but that we can dialogue about them. And that, like you said, you may not, my mom didn't even know what surrogacy even was when I entered this work, right? And now she's like, how could anybody do that? And she listens to the stories that I share on YouTube of surrogate mothers that come and want to share their story. And she's just like flabbergasted that we've allowed these types of things to happen. And so, bioethics, it affects us all. And if you're not, clued in on what that is and how it affects you, just do a little Google search, just use some AI and, because it really does impact us. And these are conversations worth having.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm having it on the podcast, is because, like I say, when I find something on the internet where I'm like, wait a minute, I have never thought about this. Chances are my audience has never thought about this. Not to say it's good or it's bad or it's right or it's wrong, but I aim to be this neutral platform that says this is information that exists. And if you don't have access to it, I want to be the place that you can find evidence based access to it. So, I would love to hear some of the ethical dilemmas that are involved in surrogacy, and please feel free to share some stories. It has been the stories that I have found on your Instagram and your social media that have really given me the most pause, because I think I didn't realize the amount of pain that could accompany surrogacy. I always thought it was just a really joyful experience.
Yeah. And that's intentional. That's great marketing on the fertility industry, right? We see, or at least I see, social media advertising for egg donors or for surrogate agencies. And they use really slick language. My bun, her oven, give the gift of life. Who doesn't want to be seen as kind of an angel, so to speak, that's providing the ultimate gift to a family or couple or person, right? It's really slick. They're really great marketing. They have a really great marketing team. And so, yeah, let's dissect some of these core concerns. First and foremost, which I always say it last, and I'm trying to start to say it first or to recognize it first. But first and foremost, the practice of surrogacy ignores the best interest of the child. Surrogacy is an inherently adult focused industry, point blank. It is the adults who are deciding what kind of child they want. They're picking maybe an egg donor or sperm donor out of a website or book based on characteristics. It's the adults who decide how much money should be exchanged. It's the adults who decide what the surrogate mother can or can't do in a contract. It's a surrogate mother who decides herself whether or not she's going to sign up to be a surrogate mother and what intended parents. And the same protections that are in place, let's say, for like adoption. And I'm not saying adoption is perfect. There are certainly flaws, and we know this, and folks who've been adopted can speak to that for sure. And again, I'm not advocating for adoption. I'm just using it as an example. But the same protections that are in place for adoption do not exist in surrogacy. Anyone, as long as they have enough money and this access to the services, right, can buy a child this way, can acquire a child, which is, in essence, is property. This is contract law. And so it reduces a child to property, and it completely leaves them out of the conversation completely. So I think that first and foremost, this adult-centered view is really ethically concerning. And then we can get into, that this is a commodification of women and again children, and that it violates human dignity. We emphasize in the work that we do that surrogacy treats children as products of a contract, like I just said, bought and sold, rather than as welcomed gifts. And again, adoption, I get this comparison a lot. Adoption is the resolution to an unintended separation, or the attempt of a resolution, right? It's a I don't want to say redeeming, but it tries to rectify something that wasn't intended on happening, right? Of a But in surrogacy, that is an absolute intentional separation and of a child and maybe their genetic parents, of a child and its birth mother, the surrogate mother. This is an intentional separation, an intentional, some call it a primal wound, right? That's a word that's used in adoption, but an intentional causing of a primal wound in a child. And so surrogacy violates the dignity of women and children by turning reproduction and our reproductive capacities into a commercial transaction, into something that can be bought and sold. There are also health risks and medical harms that are being discovered, and the body of literature is increasing here, which is wonderful. I did my own research with co-author Jennifer Law, who's the CBC founder. In 2022 we published that research, and at the time it was one of the newer studies showing these health risks to surrogate mothers. And since then we've seen more studies that show that there are health risks to surrogate mothers. There are health risks to children born through IVF, and therefore surrogacy, right? Because you have to have IVF in surrogacy. And so these procedures do carry significant risks to the surrogate mother, who honestly, and through my experience, anecdotally talking to surrogate mothers, are not always receiving this information. They don't understand the risk. They're chosen because they've had successful pregnancies. They've had wonderful pregnancy experiences. And so their thought is that that will follow with a surrogate pregnancy. And we're learning that is not true. Surrogate pregnancies are more likely to be high risk, and we can get into what that looks like. What does that mean? But for the basis of this question, we have a duty as healthcare providers, right, not to cause harm onto healthy bodies. And so we're asking an otherwise healthy person, whether that's an egg donor or a surrogate mother, to take medications to put themselves at risk in these contracts. Not to mention that many of these contracts, the surrogate mother is waiving away her confidentiality between her and her provider, right? That's no longer confidential. And she's also allowing intended parents to make end of life decisions for her in the case that she needs end of life care while she's pregnant with their child. So she's waiving away any say in her end of life care as well. I could go on and on. We have issues of autonomy and consent, even if a woman freely agrees, right? Like we hear this argument all the time. Oh, well, it's her body, it's her choice. She can do with what she wants. But there are real concerns about whether her consent is, like I said, fully informed. Does she really understand what she's signing up for? Is she being told about the risks? How much does the financial incentive play into her wafting away those risks, right? We don't allow for selling of our organs, and that's for good reason. But yet in this, we are allowed to rent a womb, right? We don't allow people to sell their organs. But she, might have subtle pressure from her family, financial situation, whatever it is, cultural, if she's maybe not from the United States. Other countries have kind of a cultural component where they might feel pressured that way. And then secondly, I mentioned autonomy. All of the contracts that a surrogate mother signs, she signs before an embryo transfer, before she's pregnant. So once she signed that and then becomes pregnant, how do we really have autonomy, right? Like she is obligated by contract then and can't change her mind. So in a sense, there's really no autonomy, and the autonomy is before she's even pregnant, you know, before the before it's even started, if that makes sense. And then again, like there's other things, there's identity and psychological concerns, both for the surrogate mother, for the children born through surrogacy. There's parental rights and disputes. There's issues with cross-border surrogacy, again, exploitation and equality. So all of these things, and then I'll mention one more, the fragmentation of motherhood, which I think your audience might be really interested in because again, we're taking a child who's their own home. They've only known their birth mother, right? They've only known that womb. And we know that that's important physiologically. We know that that is important developmentally. And we're fragmenting that. And so these are just some of the ethical dilemmas that you have to wrestle with when you say that it's okay for a woman to carry a baby for someone else.
Yeah. These are the things that I learned from your Instagram, I think, and it's a tough conversation, right? It's like, well, what if she truly does have complete informed consent? Like, what if that surrogate truly does understand the risk and she genuinely understands the fragmentation, as you put it, and she really does understand that contractually she won't be able to change her mind? Is it then okay? I guess my question is there a way that we could have surrogacy ethically, or is your opinion no, that like there's really just no way around the bad ethics of this?
Yeah, there isn't.
Hmm.
My view is that we should abolish surrogacy.
Oh, altogether, huh?
Altogether, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd take
Okay.
little steps to get there, but no, because even if what you said is true, you
Mm-hmm.
still have not considered the rights of the child,
Hmm.
which are vast. The right to know and be known by their biological parents, the right to, you know, many donor conceived individuals are through anonymous donation, and we're starting very, very, very slowly to get away from that. But even still, they don't have access to their medical records. One, if they're told that they're a product of donation, and then two, until they're 18. We know medical history matters before you turn 18,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and we have a longing and desire. Companies like Ancestry and Me and 23andMe, we have a desire to know our genetics, our lineage. And so, even if, right, even in an ideal world where a surrogate mother is truly informed, one, we still have the issue of should medical providers be able to waive away patient provider confidentiality? Should they be able to give medications that potentially could cause cancer later? Should they be able to do, can would, similar things to like, should doctors be able to do physician assisted suicide, right? Like, doesn't it go against kind of their oath? So you still have that, you have the medical component, and then you have the rights of you have the child. And um, so no, there's no way at all, I think, that you could do this in a ethical way. And so I mentioned it. We'd like to abolish surrogacy. Some of the things I'd like to see first, to be honest, so birth certificates, right? Most people, I think, would think that a birth certificate is what? Is a, let me ask you, what do you think a birth certificate's objective is, or why do we have a birth certificate?
Well, I guess it's a legal document to kind of document where and when you were born and who your leading legal guardianship is, and it's a record of I guess your lineage as well.
Sure, right. However, in pre-birth orders and other surrogacy arrangements, really it's whoever paid for the child. That's who's on a birth certificate. And so my first step would be, you know what? If we're going to do these technologies, then right away from the beginning, a child's birth certificate, there should be space for egg donor if there's one, sperm donor if there's one, intended parents, sure, right? Who intends to raise these children? um, Surrogate mother. All of this should be on a birth certificate, and it's not. And I find that deeply problematic. Really, it's just intended parents who, and everything else is lost. Shouldn't a child know those things, right? Right. So that's like one of the first things I'd love to see put into place is if we're going to do this, let's be honest and open. Secondly, there is no national database in the United States tracking the health long term of surrogate mothers, children born from surrogacy, and egg donors. We have
Wow.
no idea. Once an egg donor donates her eggs, she is quite literally lost in medical history. So if she goes on to develop cancer because she donated her eggs 3 and 4 times and was subjected to these high volumes of hormones, or if she goes on to develop infertility and then relies on the industry that she helped in her past. So there, we have no long-term tracking for any of that. We have no idea how surrogate children born through surrogacy are faring. We do have some data again on IVF and what some health risks are for children who are born through IVF, but we don't know. We aren't tracking them long term. And same for surrogate mothers. There's a new study actually that just came out in 2025, I believe, from Canada, that showed though that surrogate mothers are more likely to be diagnosed during their pregnancy and afterwards, postpartum period, with mental illness than those who are not. Our own study found that we had increased incidences of postpartum depression in surrogate mothers when compared to their own pregnancies. And so I would like to see mandated reporting on and following and tracking. We do this for donors, kidney donors. We track them. There's a database to kind of keep track of their health and how they're doing. So why not? So those are two like really easy, I think, low bearing fruit. And then I would first, if we're starting about hacking away at it, I'd first close our borders. About 33% ish, I need to look up the number again, but around that, of surrogate pregnancies in the United States are through international intended parents. So parents from Asia, other places where surrogacy is illegal. Italy was the first to close its borders to, like, you can't go into Italy to hire a surrogate mother, and you as an Italian cannot leave Italy to hire a surrogate mother. And I think that's exactly what we need to do in the United States. We could cut down on 30% of surrogate pregnancies by closing our borders. We would cut down on issues of child trafficking. We would cut down on issues of all kinds of things. But so that would be what I'd like to see. And if we could just do those three, I think I could maybe be happy. But I would also like to see, surrogacy again. Let's model this like donating an organ, right? Model legislation so that there is no financial incentive whatsoever. So you can make that informed decision as the surrogate mother. I will sign up for this risk. I will do, but under absolutely no payment, no financial transaction. And I am guessing that if we do that, you will see a in the amount of surrogate mothers in the United States. I really don't think that uh, many women will sign up.
From the data that you've seen, do you think that most surrogates and egg donors and sperm donors do it for financial gain?
This is a really hard question to answer, and this is something that folks have studied. When I did my research and I interviewed over 100 surrogate mothers, I think 96 were officially the number for the study that were included. But when I just chat with over 100 surrogate mothers, they talk a lot, and I have no doubt that they are largely motivated by altruistic means, that they want to help someone. However, this is self-reported, and of our data set, of that, most actually all, were in the lower four tax tiers for that income bracket. So, and you'll see this kind of over and over again in studies, is that there's a report of altruistic intentions, which again, I think it's there. I think, I do think, I talked to Erica, who is a surrogate mother, who's not included in this story, but man, she is a giving woman, like altruistic to the core. Like I could just tell by chatting with her. And we know that, we all have friends like that who will give the clothes off their back to help. But it's really hard to separate that when there is that financial component. And a large percentage of our women in our study reported to use that money to pay bills and get out of debt. And to me, that speaks volumes, right? And so that's a really hard question to answer, but I do think, I mean, that's partly why New York passed commercial surrogacy. What was it, 2020? It was like during COVID, the height of COVID, that they allowed commercial surrogacy laws to come back in because people weren't signing up. They had a real deficit, if you will, of surrogate mothers because altruistic surrogacy was totally legal. But they didn't have anyone signing up to be altruistic surrogate mother. I think you still will have that population of people, but I think that the number will drastically decrease.
Hmm. And do you view kind of egg donors and surrogacy as almost one and the same, where both of them are incredibly exploitative?
Absolutely. I really
Hmm.
do. And maybe even more so to our young egg donors. And again, I'm going to put that, I mean, like it is not a donation. Um, because they are young. They are often in college. They have college debt. I mean, I've spoken to egg donors who did it because they wanted to help their parents out with rent. I think there's a disconnect, and I'm not saying that egg donors aren't intelligent. That is not what I'm saying. But I think there's a little bit of a disconnect. I was a young college student once, and I honestly did consider egg donation. I was living on grants and loans, but like, I think there's a disconnect that my egg, that is my potential offspring. That is half of me. And there are studies that show that I think 50% of donors actually go on to regret their decision later in life. That is huge, 50%. And so I think that I think the fact that still to this day, again, no long-term studies. I have so many women who reach out to me that have cancer. They've never had, their family history is clean of cancer, and they have breast cancer pop up or something else. And there's no studies on it. And I think there's no studies because the fertility industry would have to report that if they found that, and they'd have to disclose it. They'll say often that the phrase they'll use is that there are no known long-term risks. Well, that may be true, but no known long-term risks does not mean no long-term risks at all. And so we are setting up egg donors to be infertile, to use the same system that they help supply eggs to. And so, even more so, I feel like for young women who are being captured by egg donation.
I have several kids in my life that are from surrogates or egg donors, and I love them dearly. And I couldn't imagine having a discussion with my very best friends that, I wouldn't have wanted them to do this because I love their kids so
Right.
deeply. So I definitely resonate with the idea of like, if we didn't have these services, then some of the kids I love the most in my life would not be here. And on the opposite end of that, now being pregnant with my first, I had always thought, I've said for years, literally years, I will have my own children and then I'll be a surrogate. Why
Mm.
wouldn't I want to be able to give families that aren't able to have children a child. And after watching some of my very best friends go through the same thing, either with an egg donor or a surrogate, it made me even more passionate about it. I was like, no, I'm
Mm.
absolutely going to be a surrogate. I just told my husband last week, I don't think I could be a surrogate. I don't think that I could grow a baby inside of my tummy and then give that baby away. And I don't know why I'm getting upset about it. There is something about that fragmentation of motherhood that just makes me sad. Even though if I knew, where the baby was going, or I knew the family and I could even maybe still be involved in that child's life, I think emotionally it would be way too hard for me to have the connection that I have with this baby. And I think I just didn't know because I had never been pregnant before. But
Mm.
now that I have this connection with this baby, I do not think I'm strong enough to then give that baby to another family. And, talking about those contracts makes me realize that you have no choice. So
Mm-hmm.
at the end of it, there is no changing your mind. They have paid all of this money. You have contractually obligated yourself to give them their child. And biologically, that child might not even be yours if you used a couple's sperm and egg together and you are simply a surrogate. At the end of it, it's really not even your child. I can only imagine, think the mental health impact of it for someone who may not have grasped the reality of the situation, much like myself pre pregnancy.
Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about that. And I had the view that I do now before I had children.
Okay.
But then after I had children, I held to it even more
Hmm.
firmly because of that. Because I am a perinatal nurse. I labor and delivery is my jam. I had my children at home, and I'm very much into that, like just that skin to skin. And I mean, I teach that. I mean, we talk about skin to skin. It's a baby friendly initiative here in California and other places, and the importance of that. But it's interesting that in surrogate pregnancies, that doesn't really matter, right? That baby's whisked away to do skin to skin with a stranger. We don't care about, she might be providing milk for that family, breast milk. And we know the best way to do that is by interaction between mom and baby. We know all of the wonderful benefits of skin to skin, of hearing that same heartbeat that you heard in utero, being next to it, feeling that breath, that warmth, that hormonal connection. So I think even after. So I'll be interested to know if after your delivery, how you feel about it as well, because for me, it changed that way. And
Mm.
obviously, it's not for every woman, because there are still women who do have their own children, and they go on to be surrogate mothers, and they have no trouble severing that bond, which to me is a little, hesitate to say this, but I'm like, okay, what kind of people have we become that we feel okay doing that, that we can separate that,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I don't want to pass judgment, because that does sound very judgmental, but it just makes me pause a second. We don't allow in the state of California, and probably other states too, we don't allow people to separate puppies from their mother for 8 weeks. We don't allow that because that's inhumane. But we do for humans. That's okay. And
So a question that has popped into my head when you
mm-hmm,
said, this baby is whisked away to a stranger.
mm-hmm,
Playing devil's advocate here,
sure.
if this is a surrogate situation, hypothetically, that's not a stranger because that baby is biologically with the mom and the dad of that egg and that sperm.
Not always, right? So let's talk gay dads. Where's mom at all? Where's the egg donor? So
Hmm,
biologically not related at all to one of them.
got it.
So one dad can have a baby. He may or may not be related to that. So this, I mean, the argument doesn't hold. But sure, stranger in the sense, if we play that out a little bit more, stranger in the sense of that baby doesn't know. That baby spends 9 months getting nutrition, sound, emotional, hormonal, all of these things that we know affect development, so and so important for fetal development. Um, they spend 9 months literally inside of someone else. So when, yes, it can be in a sense a stranger that they haven't heard those voices. In the cases of international surrogacy, for example, they may have just met in person.
Wow.
Like they've never ever heard that voice.
Okay, y'all, you know how we're always on the search for clean brands that are going to be transparent with the ingredients and the things that they put in their products? Well, I finally have found one, and I've been using their protein powder for the last 6, 7 months, and I have to say, I officially love them. I do. Just Ingredients is slowly becoming my go to place for so many things that I use in my daily life because I can see exactly what they put in their products. And there's no fillers, there's nothing, that we don't want, nothing undesirable, nothing that I can't pronounce. And I'm like, what is that? They have electrolytes. I mentioned the protein powders. They have magnesium. We know how important that is in pregnancy as well. Fish oil for people who are trying to conceive, and they actually just launched pancake and muffin mix, which I'm going to snag in my next order. And I just ordered bone broth, but I haven't had a chance to try it. Super excited for that. They also have beauty products if you have been looking to switch to a clean and minimal brand. Not only do I love Just Ingredients because they're so transparent, but I love their commitment to using real ingredients
and encouraging their consumers to become educated on optimal health and wellness, how they can support their bodies and their minds, and how do you actually understand the products that are in your life and where you might want to swap out different things. I'll never be a gatekeeping girly, and I will always test out products before I share them with you guys because I want to make sure that what I'm recommending is an honest recommendation and you can trust that it will be safe with you and your family. If you want to check out Just Ingredients, go to justingredients.us, so not .com, justingredients.us, and you can use the savings code Tranquility by HeHe, HeHe, Tranquility by HeHe, to save 10% off of your first order. Nothing makes me happier than to help you get healthier, and this is one of the brands that I love and trust, so I wanted to share it with you. All right, bye.
So, and then I'd like to draw on because I don't want us to get too stuck in this because, yeah, there are different thoughts, right? And emotions around this. But I do want to point out too, for the science folks who listen or the science geeks who maybe care about this sort of thing. But when this technology started, we didn't know that all there is to know about this, and we still don't. So I just want to point out that there's a new understanding of epigenetics, which is a kind of a hot new term, right? Epigenetics, which is what happens to our DNA. It's not the DNA itself, but epigenetics is showing that there is, beyond this emotional, physical nourishment level, that there are actual biological connections that are established between the surrogate mother and the fetus. So the fertility clinic will say, and social media will say that intended parents, or they'll tell intended parents, or they'll tell the surrogate mother that there is absolutely no genetic relationship to the fetus, right? But that is true on a DNA level, as far as like just what is your DNA. But we are learning that this relationship is more combined, more, there is a cellular component and a cellular level and an epigenetic level to this. So, for example, in in one published case, a child was found to have cancer. That cancer was linked to the surrogate mother, not to, and and it goes both ways. The fetus can act as a recovery or a help to the surrogate mother and her biological processes, and vice versa. And so this goes much, and we're still uncovering this, we're still unpacking this. So if you Google, epigenetics and surrogate mothers or microchimerisms and that sort of thing, you'll like this goes beyond even that. And so no longer can we say that it's completely like her bun, my oven, or whatever. And we are uncovering more and more of these intimate connections beyond just hormones, nutrition, a home, all of that. So it's an important consideration.
It makes so much sense. I mean, when you were talking about the health risk, it does make logical sense that if we are implanting an embryo from a sperm and an egg into a woman that's not her egg, that we should expect there to be not necessarily health complications, but we shouldn't be surprised if those arise because there has to be some sort of crossover. It's almost
Right.
negligent or silly for us to think there would be absolutely no crossover. I mean, when we implant that embryo, the placenta now grows from that mother, right? The blood supply is now actually a crossover and a mix of three different humans instead of just two different humans. That it makes biological sense to think about that.
Right. It's in essence, she's taking on, in essence, a donor kidney, right? Like, so,
Sure.
and that is the thought behind why do we see preeclampsia and gestational surrogate mothers more. And the thought is because this is a donor being. It is not her makeup. It's not her material, and her body is responding to this like foreign um, entity, right? Because in her own pregnancy, she is half of that embryo. And so there's some thought logic behind that as well, right? Is this why it's higher risk? Because it is a completely foreign group of cells that we're putting into her body.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Okay, as far as the like contractual obligation and the contracts, are there no clauses at all that give that mother back any sort of autonomy? You had mentioned end of life. I had mentioned my own walk with the idea of, yes, I'll always be a surrogate. Now I'm pregnant. I'm like, wow, I couldn't be I couldn't imagine being at the end of pregnancy and then thinking like I changed my mind and not having the autonomy to do that. So did these clauses just simply not exist?
You're correct. The only place where this exists, where, and we're getting away from it, and this is what I'm fighting so hard in the United States. So places like New York and California, we have these acts that legalize surrogacy in our state. And really, all that does is it enforces those pre birth orders and it enforces contracts more so that, yes, surrogate mothers, there really is no backing out. There is really no say for her in the cases of if she changes her mind. She's already signed that child away before the child was even conceived, or not even conceived. We'll take a step back because that child might be conceived. It might already be an embryo. But before that child was implanted into her uterus, she has already given that away, right? Because it's not hers genetically, so to speak. And it may not, again, be genetically the intended parents, but for the sake and argument, we'll say it's theirs. But yes, no, absolutely. And I argue, so in other states where contracts are, well, surrogacy is illegal, which are getting few and far between, or there's just no ruling on it, like it's not illegal nor legal. Those are actually the better states because the contract doesn't hold up. So in those situations, you might be able to still, if you changed your mind. But then again, it's like, again, like every time I go through these scenarios, I'm centering the kid, right? I'm centering the baby. I'm centering this life. And it just makes it so incredibly messy for everyone because even if the surrogate mother changes her mind that she should get to keep the life that she's been carrying, we still have to think about that child and what we're doing? And so it still puts you in a sticky situation. But so all that to say that when you see like, oh, this state's going to come out with a Child Parent Security Act or something that will legalize surrogacy and it'll be so much better for the child and it'll be so much better for the surrogate mother. No, all it is it's saying that fertility industries can set up shop legally and that contracts are enforceable and we are signing away all of that via contract before a child is even a successful pregnancy.
Wow. And when it comes to medical complications in that pregnancy, should they arise, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes, just really anything, cholestasis, needing an induction for a medical reason, who legally gets to make that decision? Is it that surrogate because it's her body and it's her life that's on the line? Or is it the intended parents because that is their baby and they have been paying for that medical care?
That is another really sticky situation. And there you have two. I think it was in our film Breeders, where we interview an obstetrician gynecologist, and he talks about this. You've also put a medical provider in this weird position, right? Because the mother is the surrogate mother is his patient, but he also has the patient that is the child, right? So this gets incredibly complex and incredibly murky, especially in cases of, timing of birth, especially again if we're talking about foreign nationals who are coming, they may want an induction or a C-section because they're coming over on XY date and that baby needs to be here, whether or not it's medically indicated or not. This
Wow.
could have been set forth in a contract, but even still, if it's not, it can become incredibly dire for the surrogate mother. I think in Erica's case, she did not want an induction or a C-section just I mean, most providers won't do a C-section now just because a patient wants one. But certainly elective inductions are still prominent. But she didn't want an induction, and she had to really, even though it was something they agreed upon, she still had to fight for that continually. And interestingly, another thing people, while we're on the topic of contracts and what's in it, and um, a surrogate mother does have typically legal representation when she is signing a contract. That legal representation, though, is often provided by, and I would caution anyone who is getting ready to get into into a surrogacy arrangement, if the agency has offered her the legal counsel or the intended parents, or they have selected that legal counsel for her, I would walk away. That is a huge red flag. But even if it's not offered by them, it's still often paid for by them, which is a huge conflict of interest, right? Lawyers, you know, in divorce situations can't know, or, the other party's spouse or whatever, because there's huge conflicts of interest. And to me, that's just a big red flag anyway. If an intended parent is paying for you to get your legal counsel, if you're not selecting that on your own, just be cautious. Also, once a surrogate mother signs that contract and everything is done, her legal representation ends. That lawyer doesn't follow her through her pregnancy if issues were to arise. So, in cases where I talk to mothers who have things go sideways, they're often having to pay for their own legal counsel out of money that they've then received for their pregnancy. And so I've seen this go off the rails in this direction many times. And so that is something, people are like, oh, well, they have legal counsel, they're being walked through this process. Sure. But once they sign the contract, that relationship is over unless they've paid for it. And most intended parents aren't going to pay for the surrogate mother to have. I've actually never heard of that. So what I have heard of is more that they're left with nobody to help them. They've signed a contract that they may not even really understand. I mean, I read legal documents and I still have trouble sometimes understanding what they say. So for someone who doesn't do this regularly. And so anyway, I think it's a huge issue.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a huge issue. Okay, so I guess, as someone who does do contracts regularly through, my business as a doula and negotiating
Mm-hmm.
contracts with clients, I have contracts with brands, I have contracts with other businesses. How much flexibility and negotiation can be put into these contracts, or are surrogates kind of between a rock and a hard place, meaning, well, if you negotiate too much, they're just going to walk away because there's other surrogates that would be easier to work with. And so then you just won't be chosen.
So yes and no. So
Okay.
it's interestingly, I'm a part of Facebook groups where surrogate mothers talk about their experiences or they compare agencies. And I'm usually just a fly on the wall. But it is interesting to me how many intended parents get on these pages and yes, they want easy and inexpensive. So they'll say, what's the best country you've done this at so that I can just do this easiest and as
Cheapest.
cheap as possible. Yeah, I was trying to think of a better way to say that. But so yes, the threat would still be there. If you were too picky, so to speak, they could just, okay, we're done. We don't want to match with you. So once a surrogate mother matches with an intended parent, some of those things have already been stated out loud. So like, agencies don't want to match someone who's totally against abortion with someone who will abort for the wrong sex, right? Like, so there's a little bit of that that's going to happen. However, you have to understand again, this is like everyone's excited. Intended parents are excited at the idea of having a family. Surrogate mothers are excited about helping someone. They've signed up. They're excited about this journey. That's a word they use a lot, that you hear a lot. And so when contract negotiations start, I've also had surrogate mothers say, well, they've expressed things and they've fallen into the idea or belief that they've really gotten along with the intended parents, that things are really, and they understand, and okay, well, we're not going to put that in the contract, but we completely understand that you don't want an induction and we will honor that. But we're just not going to put it in the contract. And so it doesn't end up getting in the contract, and then things change, right? And then it's not as rosy as it once appeared. We also see this in cases of intended parents who promise contact after the child's born, who say, you're not just going to be our surrogate mother, you're going to be auntie, or,
Part of our
we're going to,
family.
yeah, we're going to send. And then as soon as the baby's born, that actually is completely, or even before that, it's completely severed and it's not upheld. And that's not in a contract either about, keeping up with the family after the birth. But um, so all that to say, contracts are incredibly lengthy and incredibly in depth, but they tend, in what I've read and what I've seen, they tend to favor and explicitly kind of favor the intended parents' wishes and desires. There are some loopholes, of course, with like abortion, for example. You can't force someone to have an abortion. So even though in a contract it would say that you agree to abort in cases of XYZ, women can't be required to do that. Certainly, they will be threatened with breach of contract, and you'll have to keep the child, and you'll have to pay us this much money, and you'll have to pay the lawyer fees. And I mean, I was in Portugal for a conference and got an email from a surrogate mother with this exact story. The baby had an issue that actually was treatable with decent success rate. I'm in this world. I've worked in a facility that does fetal surgeries. So I was aware of the condition and honestly a pretty hopeful prognosis. But she was told that she needed to abort and she didn't want to. And so she was kind of asking us for, help and what can she do and blah, blah, blah. And, she ended up feeling overwhelmed with the pressure and went through with the abortion. But these are just to highlight some of the things that can come up. And so Erica and her story recently that I shared with her again, she was so ultra like wonderful woman, but she ended up homeless in her state and her family and support system were in another state and the intended parents actually forbade her from leaving the state. And so it was leave the state and be in breach of contract and yada 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 or be homeless with her two own children of her own, and these are things that you can't put in a contract, no matter how detailed, no matter how, I mean, yes, at the end of the day, the contract did state she would not leave the state, but Erica couldn't have thought, oh, my apartment will have carbon monoxide and mold and my children and I will be suffering in and out of the hospital and I'll lose my job. And, so it's a messy, messy, messy industry.
It really is. And as altruistic as surrogates are, you would hope that the family would also be as giving to their surrogate once someone had kind of given up their body and their autonomy to provide them with a child. Okay, so you talked about red flags and conflicts of interest. One of the things was representation. What are a couple other red flags of people who are thinking about being a surrogate that you think like, okay, you should really watch out for this if you decide that this is right for you?
Yeah. Well, that's hard to answer because I'm just totally against it, right? So the whole thing of I there have been surrogate mothers who have died during their pregnancies and childbirth, having a child for another baby, leaving their own husbands and their own, husbands widowers and their children motherless. So that I don't even know that I'm going to answer that question as far as other red flags because I feel like that in some way would endorse, you can do it as long as you look out for this because I just really would like people to have a bigger picture of that. Maybe I'll say just do your research, right? Like listen to stories of surrogate mothers that have had a bad experience. I know surrogate mothers are kicked out of agency Facebook groups, agency support groups for having bad experiences because they don't. One of them was Gloria. You can look up her story on our website. She was the poster child surrogate mother, her first surrogacy. Her second one went terrible. Now she deals with PTSD and mental health issues. But because she was having a bad experience, she was no longer allowed to attend support groups directly for people who are having a hard time, right? Like that's the definition of a support group. And so I would encourage anyone who's thinking about this to listen to the horror stories and not just to think, oh, won't happen to me. It only happens to them. Because to me, one is too many. One child trafficked is too many. One child abandoned or left stateless or left without, left in an orphanage is too many for me. One woman who's died is enough for me. One woman harmed is enough for me. This is enough for me to say that this is not an okay practice. And the fertility industry is just making money off of women and children.
And how often are we seeing babies be trafficked under the guise of surrogacy?
So that's like also an incredibly hard question because once a child, so in the case of international surrogacy, once a child has, goes home, the birth certificates will be in the intended parent's name. And once they leave this country, we can't know what would happen to them. And I'm going to highlight two things with that. One is the Arcadia case here in Southern California. If you are not familiar with that case, then Google it once you're, for your listeners. It is, I was interviewed on all sorts of media outlets about it. Kayla is a woman that I interviewed on our YouTube channel. She found out that so basically, intended parents owned the agency. So they created their own surrogacy agency, and they have over 20 children born through surrogacy, many under the age of 3. Kayla was led to believe that she was their only surrogate mother. The couple was no longer able to have children, and then she found out there were many more women like her. The FBI are currently investigating, and they only found out about the case because one of the children was sent to the hospital because of abuse by a nanny. And so CPS got involved and started to look into the case, and then they found over 20 children in the home. Why does anyone need 20 children? And so to me, that smells like trafficking. The FBI are still investigating. Court cases are starting, I think, this month. But anyway, so there's one. There's been other scandals. I think her name's Teresa Erickson, was a lawyer who was involved in a scandal in 2013 or early, like mid 2000s. And she calls herself the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the corruptness of the fertility industry. And so these are just things, like that you can look out for and see. So I encourage you to look into that if you're considering. Also, interestingly, in our social medias, because that is one way we educate, I had a inbox message from a NICU nurse, and she was just absolutely beside herself because as a NICU nurse, as a nurse, we are, and I think as a doula probably, you're a mandatory reporter, right? If there's abuse or sexual abuse or anything, you have to report to CPS, to agencies that you think abuse is occurring or neglect, et cetera, et cetera. However, she found out as a NICU nurse, she had some concerns about a baby that was born through surrogacy to foreign nationals, intended parents. I think they were from Asia. I'm not sure, but they're not US citizens. But they had their baby here in the United States through surrogacy, and she and her colleagues had some serious enough red flags that they wanted to get CPS or social services involved. And she found out, which this was kind of news to me, but I guess it makes sense, that CPS, that we don't get involved, even though that child is born here in the United States. They will not get involved in those cases. So even though those nurses had whatever suspicions it was that they would not be good fits, they would not get involved. So this is what I'm talking about. There's no protection for children. And so I wish I had a number for you. I don't. That's the long wind of it, is that's enough for me right there on, of things. Rudy Rupik is his last name, or Rubik. He is the owner or founder of a big agency, and he himself has been quoted to say too just how kind of sketchy the fertility industry is. And so yeah, I fear it's way too many children, way too many. I mean, again, one is too many, but I fear more than we probably anticipate would.
That's so scary. It really is, especially for something that I think probably originated as what we had talked about, like this altruistic way of helping families who are unable to have their own children, and they just are seeking so badly a way to grow their family, and it has become corrupt because of one reason or another. So do you have suggestions for families who are facing infertility struggles that is not surrogacy or egg donors? Like, how can these families grow their family if the fertility, industry is really as corrupt as some people believe? What are the options that those families have? Because it's so devastating to think like,
Right.
okay, I'm facing infertility. Is my reality genuinely just to not have children, even though I desperately want to be a mom and I know that I would be a good mom? I know that my partner and I would be good parents. Like, what are the other options here, or are there any?
Yeah, I think that is honestly, you said you started with a hard question, but this is the hard
Oh,
question because this is where we get to the hearts, right? And that's what the fertility industry paints, right? Is that this is a mom and a dad who would be great parents. They're your next door neighbors, they're your Bible study leaders, I don't know. And there are those people, right? And yeah, our heart aches for people like that. I have to maintain though that just because we're struggling with something that profound and that weighty, it doesn't give us a right to do certain things. Surrogacy being one of them. It doesn't give us a right to use another woman's body. It doesn't give us a right to ask that. It doesn't give us a right to a child. We maintain that not everyone has a right to a child, even those so desperately wanting one. I know we talked about adoption. Again, not the perfect situation, certainly. My husband and I were married for quite some time before we surprise had a child, and we did foster care. And that was one way we got to love on kiddos and children. And, I know that that also is not for everyone. I know adoption is not for everyone. Again, I'm not an advocate really for adoption. I think that, you know, I often tell those who are struggling with infertility not to forget too that you and your spouse are a family, whether or not children come. I think there's this kind of pressure that a family is X amount of children or having that, but to not lose sight of that. This is an incredibly hard question to answer, but it doesn't give us the right, and that's what I'm left with at the end of the day when I weigh all of this and consider all of this. And I don't think unless you've gone through infertility that, it's really hard to be a voice that speaks about this because it is so personal and so devastating. And that's the other thing, it's a good desire to want to have children. That is a great desire, but it doesn't give the right to exploit and use and to make children property.
mm, yeah. Okay, my last question is for families that do choose surrogacy or egg donors or sperm donors. I think I know your answer, but I always want to give you the space to answer for yourself. Do you believe that the only way forward is to be honest with that child and let them know how they were conceived so that they can then build their own identity based on their true conception and their honest medical background?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. When that time is, I struggle with that because I'm like, oh, they should know right away. But then, you know, there is adults again putting a burden on a child to understand a situation that they may not be ready for, right? And I've thought about that. That again is saying, I'm going to give you this adult sized problem that I created and I'm going to tell you about it. You deal with it, right? Like, and that's a really harsh way of saying that. But I think I just wanted to drive the point that we're putting a really big adult centered problem onto a child that, my daughter's 3. She's just working out like, is that a boy? Is that a girl? Is that a cat? Is that a dog? Right? So I think you have to be careful about how you present this to children. But I absolutely do think that children have a right to know their identity, their origins, their conception. And absolutely do think that they should know. There's a gal I talked to, her name was Gail in Australia, and she was a single mom who did sperm donation, and she found out that her daughter had over 200 siblings and has been walking alongside her daughter and wrestling with that. And she is a real advocate too of being honest and forthright about a child's conception and their story. And so, yeah, I think, yes, honesty. I think the harder question then begins, how do you implement that for a child as they grow? But absolutely.
This is all just so entangled, right? I don't know
Mhm.
that there's necessarily a right answer at this moment with what we know. What you just shared reminds me of that documentary, Our Father, where it was the fertility doctor
Oh,
who used his own sperm to inseminate hundreds of women. And then it wasn't until those children were adults where they started to realize, holy shit, we have so many siblings. This is not only like terrifying, but we've all lived in this same space. We could have very easily married each other and tried to procreate and caused problems of our own unintentionally, completely unknowingly. So I know I said, Kelly, that was my last question, but obviously that wasn't my last question. My last question, I guess, kind of revolves around the long-term mental health of adults that are the product of surrogacy, egg donor, sperm donor, that either have the privilege to know or that information is withheld from them. Do we see a difference in these adults?
Yeah, I think the jury's still out on children who's born through surrogacy. I think those children are starting to become adults. And so I think we might start seeing that. I mean, we know Olivia Morel, she's a woman out of Europe. Again, Google the name. She's amazing, but she was born through surrogacy and she is 100% against it for so many reasons. And so there you have just one example of someone who's born through surrogacy, now an adult who is speaking out against it. Because, in one of our films, Anonymous Father's Day, an adult now who was born through sperm donation said, it is okay to be happy that you were born and love your life. And I'm paraphrasing, but also question your conception at the same time and the moral ethics of it. And I think that's where a lot of donor conceived individuals are, at least the ones I've talked to, the ones that I know through different, now there are all kinds of groups connecting adult donor conceived individuals with each other, with their families, because it is important. And we do see a rise in genealogical bewilderment, people wanting to know, realizing there was a difference, and then finding out through Ancestry and Me and other platforms. So there is quite a bit of body of literature on the donor conceived population and how detrimental it can be to learn that you were donor conceived later in life, to wrestle with those issues, and then also just to find out you have relatives around the world or in your own community. And then I think the jury's still out on children who are born through surrogacy, although we are starting, I think, to hear some of those voices.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what that data says in the years and kind of
Mm.
decades to come. Callie, thank you so much for being here. This was genuinely one of the most interesting episodes I have ever done. I feel like in so many episodes, I come with a lot of knowledge, and I can really kind of spar with the expert that is sitting in front of me, and I feel very confident in the topics that we're talking about. And I can honestly say today was not one of those days. I didn't come with a lot of information and I didn't know a lot of the stories, and I certainly didn't realize all of the risk and I think maybe the darker sides of surrogacy and donor sperm and egg. And, I, as of right now, I do stand still very firm in my decision that I am in no place to tell other people what to do with their life or their body. So I do support people in choosing whatever is best for them. But I feel very grateful and privileged to have you on the show to share this side, because I do think it is something that not a lot of people have access to and exposure to. I know that I didn't until I found your social media. And like I say, I think it has made me a better, more well rounded servant of the families that I serve. It has made me more compassionate and understanding, a perspective that I had never learned before. And it has given me things to think about as I evolve as a human and as a mother and as someone who serves families. So, genuinely, thank you so, so, so much. If people wanted to connect with you, learn about the CBC, had a story to share, how can they connect with you?
Sure. Well, first, I want to say that I appreciate you having me on the show, even though you're not sure of your own convictions, because I think, we're in a place where it's really easy to not have public discourse about these
Sure.
really hard topics because there is a real fear of cancellation, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, I just applaud you for having the conversation. And yeah, I'm all, if you have a question and you're a listener, I'm happy to receive it and try to answer it. If you want to tell your story, I'm happy to hear that too. Folks can reach out to me directly. I'll give you my email is Kallie, KALLIE.Fell, FELL, at cbc-network.org. That's where you can email me directly, and I welcome it. Our website, which has all kinds of things, our research, surrogacy laws around the state, other things to consider, is cbc-network.org. We have 11 documentary films as well as a lot of interviews up on our YouTube channel, which are absolutely free to watch, just some advertisements, unfortunately. But our channel is at cbc-network.org. That you can find us there. And then you can find us on all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Our Instagram is at the CBC Network. Similar to that, like I said, is Twitter and Facebook. My personal Twitter, which I love for people to engage with me there as well, is at Cal_Fell. So there's a plethora of ways for you to get in touch with me or get in contact with me. But I just really welcome the conversation and appreciate anyone who's still with us and listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kallie, you're in a good community. We, for the most part, are people who are welcoming to conversations, and I think I've done a really great job of building a community where we are open to having conversations that maybe we haven't been exposed to, or even with people who have oppositional views as us. And it's something that not only do I take a lot of pride in that I have built that, but I am so proud of my community, and I love them so deeply that they're willing to engage in these conversations, because it is something that I believe is going to move our society forward. And so, listeners, obviously, you know me, leave it to me to bring you the topics that make you go, what? Really? Is that true? I'm so glad that you guys showed up for us today. And thanks for being part of this conversation. And if you are a family that's going through fertility, you know I'm sending you hugs. You know I see you. You know I know how hard that is. And I'm just sending you so much love. And if you are someone who has a child of a donor or a surrogate, there's no judgment here from me. I know that you guys know that. I would never judge you. I'm so happy that you found what works for your family. And if you're someone like me who thought you would want to be a surrogate, maybe this was a conversation that you needed to hear. I know for me, it was something that I needed to hear, but I'm so intrigued about all aspects and all spectrums of the decisions that play into women's health. And I will never, ever shut down a conversation because it's uncomfortable or it's taboo or it's not the cool thing to do, or God forbid I get canceled. Although I've pretty much decided at this point that I'm uncancelable, not because I don't think people will cancel me, but because I'm just not going to stop. So you can try, but I'm still coming back for more. You will always see me talking about the hard things because I genuinely believe that you guys deserve the information that will empower you to make the best decision for you and your family and your children. All right, you guys, I'll see you in the next episode. Be sure to follow Kallie and the CBC on social media. And you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and at the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I love hanging out with you, and it is an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review and tell others why they should be listening to the Birth Lounge podcast too. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent without all the trauma that you so commonly hear about on social media. New episodes air every Wednesday and Friday. Hit that follow button so you never miss an episode. I'm HeHe, and this is the Birth Lounge Podcast.